Hello there, friends and neighbors. Thanks for coming back to my channel. This is me, Stella Hendricks, and today we are going to do the finale for True Crime, Death, and Celebrity, the Dorothy Stratten story. It's actually called LA Story, but I changed its name because it talks way too much about Snively, and we only want to talk about Dorothy. So I think this will be the last section. And of course, I'm only reading excerpts, I'm not reading the whole thing. And lots of my opinion in here too. Everyone had told Dorothy Stratten that her husband was a dangerous man, rendered explosively unstable by his declining fortunes, by his failure to achieve, by his loss of the only woman he seemed to love. No, that's not how you treat a woman that you love. He never loved her. Let's get that straight. 1980s or whatever year published this book. Stratten drove a couple of miles. Oh wait, was I supposed to read all this? Oh, I was gonna read this. Okay, back in 1978, when Snively had first entered Stratten's life, a girlfriend warned that they'd find Dorothy dead in an alley someday. Fellow playmate Roseanne Caton said he was capable of killing Dorothy and himself. He had no life value. Marilyn Grabowski warned her. Nellie Hoog Stratten, according to the Bogdanovich account, woke up on Thursday, August 14th with a terrible premonition and called to talk to Dorothy. Perhaps that was why, when she left the Copa de Oro house about 9:30 that morning, everyone but Louise knew of only two meetings, one with Bob Houston, then one to a more famous blondes poses with Mario Casilli. Louise alone knew that between Houston and Casilli, Dorothy would be with Snively. Okay, so up here it talks about how her friend says, oh, someday they'll find Dorothy dead in an alley. That reminds me almost exactly of what happened to Star Stowe. And there's a recent program that came out discussing Playmate murders. And the hosts of that show seemed really keen to paint certain organizations as very culpable for these situations. They would probably blame Dorothy's death also on a certain corporation. But I think that is such BS. We need to talk about drug abuse. We need to talk about violence in the home between intimate partners. That is what causes these jealousies when women become empowered and sexy. It's such a strange idea that people think like violence and sex go together. Therefore, putting naked women in Playboy is like encouraging violence against them. What? Strange ideas that people have. Anyway, that popped into my head and I am so against those kinds of ideas. Stratten drove the couple of miles from Bel Air to Century City in her battered Mercury with the Galaxina plates for her 10 a.m. appointment with Houston. He remembers her as being terribly uncertain about what she should do. She just said that she was one unhappy, confused young lady, he recalled, although she was not convinced that leaping from one intense relationship directly into another was right for her. While they were talking, Snively called. It was a very strange conversation, Houston said. Snively asked if Stratten was there, whether she discussed the matter of the house. One of his projects was finding them a house outside the city where there would be some horses and some kind of a retreat. This was the ranch, perhaps, that Stratten had mentioned to Marilyn Grabowski. She seemed to believe that buying Snively a house would also buy her freedom from him and from her own nagging sense of obligation. I think everybody, Peter and I and her mother and everybody, were saying that's absurd, said Houston. You don't owe him anything. No one knows all of what transpired in the hour that Stratten and Snyder spent together in that last afternoon. They must have talked, for Stratton's purse and his list were found upstairs. So then it talks in pretty graphic terms about the indecent assault that Paul committed against Dorothy, and I don't think it's appropriate to go into tons of graphic details. But I do think it's important to Dorothy's story that we talk about the vicious and violent way that she was attacked and before she was killed. Because I really like this show called American Playboy. It's like a history of Hugh Hefner, but it briefly talks about Dorothy Stratton's story, and it makes it seem like Snively was just a wronged husband who was crazy in love and was losing his wife and the love of his life, and he was so despondent about this that he, out of jealousy and rage, killed her in a moment of passion and then killed himself. That is not at all what happened. He brutally assaulted her for an extended amount of time before he violently killed her. So this whole story of the broken heart is such complete bullshit. And it makes me grossed out how they try to kind of imply that throughout this whole story. And then they're sure to leave graphic details about the assault and the murder. Oh, and you're gonna go on and on about how this guy was so in love? Friends, obsession and love are not the same thing. They're kind of like sex and rape. They're kind of like physically similar, but they're not at all actually similar at all, are they? They're actually kind of opposites, aren't they? The way you treat someone you love is not the way you treat someone who you consider your possession. He was a pimp, and she was nothing to him but a hoe. An incredibly expensive, beautiful hoe that he couldn't handle leaving. Or losing, I mean. Anyway. So we don't need those details. Okay. Dorothy Stratton was buried in that little Westwood cemetery near the plots she'd wondered about a few yards from Marilyn Monroe's grave. Isn't that crazy? Dorothy's death was a kind of flame out that era, observed Roseanne Caton, whose words might be an epitaph for an era. It seemed that the year after people started disappearing and gay guys started dying, I kind of associated Dorothy's death with that kind of end of carefreeness. I know a lot of people felt that way, especially among the Playboy crowd. So Roseanne Caton, also Roseanne Caton Walden, she's featured on a couple of the Dorothy Stratton documentaries. I really like her. And she's the one who says, who I got that phrase from, life in pre-AIDS Playboy? And I realized I had said that in one of my videos before, and I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't trying to be shitty about AIDS or the epidemic or any of that. I just meant that, yeah, that carefreeness and how things were in the 70s, there was a lot more, you just had to be more careful after, the AIDS epidemic came out. And that was what I was trying to imply when I used that phrase. I was not trying to be derogatory towards any community at all. So I do apologize if anyone took it that way. I will be more careful about how I phrase things, but that is what I meant by that. So that is actually the end of this story about Dorothy Stratton. Whoop! Jimmy. I'm gonna go and show you some pictures really quick. Whoops. This is from They All Laughed. This is when she was shooting in New York. That is the director who she was in love with. Oh yes, I'm such a fan of this roller skating poster. And she doesn't have any of them on there, but there are more shots from this shoot, and she's in there with a vampire dude. I'm serious. There's a vampire. No, he's not in any of these ones, but he's picked her up and kind of like laying her back like this over a couple of parts. And I realized this is the same era that my favorite version of Dracula came out with. My boyfriend, Frank Langella, I still don't know how to say his name, but it was during the same time and I was delighted to discover that. So it just felt like a fun little gift from Dorothy. I like to imagine that their spirits can come and talk to me and say, hi, thanks for keeping my story alive. Or something like that. I hope they would say to me. We don't want to show the face of the loser. Hang on. You know what we're gonna do? Where's my marker? Where's my marker? I'm gonna marker out his face. Ha! That is what we do to you, Snively. Galaxina. Iconic look that she has in Galaxina. Her family. It's Louise and John and her mom. I can't show these pictures because there's too much evil. Beautiful. And I may have shown you these pictures before. That's just Playboy Mansion. But since it's the finale, we're going to run through all the pictures again. I think that's the Dairy Queen she worked at. Random. Ugh. So many pictures of Snively to be avoided. Yay! All right, and that is it for LA story, renamed by me, the Dorothy Stratten story, from True Crime, Death and Celebrity. And it doesn't actually say who wrote that one. Oh wait, it does. No, it does not. Just kidding. I'm sure it does somewhere in here, but I'm not going to look for it at the moment. You can find these books on Amazon, on eBay, pretty much probably wherever you want to, and they're not terribly expensive. I think this one was like $10. So, good times. It's got more chapters in there also. Marvin Gaye, Lana Turner, Christian Brando, Sid Vicious, and Nancy Spungen, who we will actually eventually be reviewing that story too, but not for a little while, because right now we're on a Playboy kick, as you probably noticed. So thank you so much, friends and neighbors, for reviewing that story with me. I absolutely love the Dorothy Stratten stuff. Next, we are going to be reading a little bit out of Mark Yagala's book, which I actually have right here, Wall Street Joyride. The only interesting parts to me are the parts with Sandy Bentley in them. So we'll be reading the Sandy Bentley parts. I want you to remember that this guy is not the world's most reliable narrator. I'm pretty sure he is also a convicted felon. And he seems very vindictive and quite out for revenge and self-glorification in the writing of this book. But it is one hell of a joyride, I'll tell you that. So we're going to go through and read the Sandy Bentley stuff next, and then we'll figure out where we go from there. Where do we go? We'll figure it out. So, friends and neighbors, until then, don't do nothing I wouldn't do. I'll catch you on the flip side.